to approve the waiver of deadline for superintendent to recommend potential changes to board policy ADB. The recommendation associated with that item is that the Board of Education confirm the waiver of the deadline for the superintendent to recommend potential changes to board policy ADB and related implementation as set by board resolution dated January 25th, 2022. Kind of like the Lehman discussion, this is a pretty narrow item. This is about confirming the waiver. I think we talked about this at the last 3 meetings, certainly the last 2. This is not a rehash of the resolution in large. This is not a discussion of policy ADB and should it be revised or not revised and what's going to happen. This is simply an agenda item to kind of put the dot at the end of the period to ensure that we as the board have actually taken action to provide a waiver for the deadline that was specified in that resolution. And with that, I will open it up to board comments and discussion. Director Wright, go ahead.
I'm trying to think how to, would you prefer, I'm trying to think about what's appropriate, Director Peterson, do we want to put a motion on the table and then have discussion, or would you prefer discussion prior to a motion on the table?
We could take a motion. There was no attachment with this item. So the motion, I believe, would be to confirm the waiver of the deadline to remove the September 1st to, again, to close that out. Superintendent Kane, did you have any comments on that? You looked like you were queuing.
Oh, no, I do not have any additional comments. The staff looked for a way to meet everyone's criteria from our last meeting of not doing the waiving the deadline with a resolution, but rather just confirming what you already did based on the minutes. Did I get that about right? Thank you.
Correct, because we did not have any action items at the last meeting. So there were no votes or decisions made. Okay, so, go ahead, Director Ray.
So I'd like to make a motion and then have us discuss it, because I think the motion I'd like to present more accurately describes where we were after the work session. So this will be my motion. I would move that the culture of individual excellence and inclusion resolution be amended to replace the first statement under the now therefore be it resolved with the following. The Board of Education directs the superintendent to produce a monitoring report in collaboration with the Equity Advisory Council regarding the implementation of policy ADB, educational equity. The monitoring report would include the standard elements, interpretation, operational definition, explanation of implementation, and analysis of metrics and data. And this is flexible, but presentation of this report is to be included in the proposed monitoring report scheduled for the board meeting on May 23rd when we talk about safe, positive culture and climate. And I just picked that date because that feels like educational equity fits within that topic that's already scheduled for us to have a discussion about. So that's the motion I would put on the table.
I apologize for the redundancy, but I'm a person that just has to see things. Would you please reread that for me? Now that I have the actual resolution pulled up, I think I can help. I think it will help me to figure out what we're looking at.
Thank you, I apologize. So I move that the culture of individual excellence and inclusion resolution, be amended to replace the first statement under the now therefore be it resolved. And that's the statement that I believe is causing great confusion, because it says, you know, that the superintendent is charged to bring back potential changes. And I don't think that's what we're after. I think we're after implementation, not wordsmithing a policy, but I'm sorry, I'm not repeating my motion. And the motion goes on to say, the Board of Education directs the superintendent to produce a monitoring report in collaboration with the Equity Advisory Council regarding the implementation of policy ADB, educational equity. The monitoring report would have the standard elements, interpretation, operational definition, explanation of implementation, and analysis of metrics and data. And then presentation of this report is to be included as on the proposed monitoring report schedule for the board on May 23rd with the theme of safe, positive culture and climate.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Second.
Motion by Ray as read, second by Meek, and now we can have discussion because we have something a little bit more tangible. Go ahead, Director Meek.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I had planned to pull this item from the consent agenda. I had sent you an email about it last night. And the reason was because I just feel there's a lack of clarity on the status of both the culture of individual excellence and inclusion resolution and the board policy ADB, educational equity. And I just think clarity is essential if we are to address conflict and alleviate any fears or unfounded fears and identify valid concerns. I'm concerned that if we pass this item with no board discussion, that the 7 of us would walk away with different ideas in our head as to what we just agreed to, and the superintendent would not have clarity either. And I think that would have led to more frustration and conflict in our community. I encourage our board to amend the resolution and strike item 1. I'll use your language, but I'm fine with that. Without taking this action, there would be much confusion around the proposed statement to be struck, which was item 1. And again, it would lead to further conflict. To explain why I feel this is an appropriate action for this board at this point in time, I need to share a little bit of history with the fact that a year ago, like many school boards across the country, our board was experiencing contentious school board meetings with some parents and community members expressing concerns that CRT education was being taught in our classrooms and that students were being harmed. There was a national narrative underway at that time, and our schools were caught up in this movement. 4 of my colleagues here were elected and campaigned to take action in this area. So once elected and before being sworn in, our new board members held a private retreat that included a community member who's also a representative from the organization FAIR. And in that capacity, he provided a binder.
Can I interrupt? Before, you're intending to provide a history, but now we're editorializing on the resolution and things, if you can stick to.
So
Thank you.
I'll get to it. So I bring up this private retreat just because 3 of us on the board today and the public were not able to attend or listen to the dialogue, and that directly fed into the resolution. So this resolution, I'll skip ahead. This topic and the rhetoric surrounding it, it really deeply divided our community, and it raised fears that students are being hurt. In the midst of a global pandemic where families in our community were fearful for their health, safety, and livelihoods, this national narrative just further caused harm. So fast forward to today, it's been nearly a year since these concerns were raised. The educational equity policy remains fully intact and in force within our schools, and not one word of the policy has been changed or even recommended to be changed. So I ask my colleagues, if you truly believe students are being harmed through this policy, why would you refuse to take real action? Why would you refuse to ask for a monitoring report that would demonstrate in an accountable way whether there is a true need to change language? And why would you refuse to ask for metrics to demonstrate the state of the district when it comes to providing all students a safe and inclusive environment? Our students deserve nothing less than this type of action. This resolution needs to be amended to address the current situation and to provide the clarity that our students, staff, and community deserve.
Okay, other director comments, questions? Director Williams.
So as far as I'm aware, generally speaking, there aren't monitoring reports for policies. It's around the RNs and not around specific policies. So to me, this resolution is tasking the superintendent to come back to the board with some clarity around the policy. And that is what I personally am looking for. And so while I agree with a lot of the things you said in your amendment, I do not agree with the monitoring report aspect.
Other directors? Director Weiniger, then Director Ray.
When this resolution was drafted, we had a different superintendent that I felt wasn't taking action, and that's a big reason why I was a proponent of it. Since then, a lot has happened and changed, and that's why I'm okay with this date being waived, and the superintendent has presented a plan on her interpretation of this resolution, and I think that's a great plan. So I don't agree with changing the current resolution or doing anything with it. I agree with just simply waiving the deadline, and I'm seeing what comes of her plan. I think it's a great plan.
And Director Ray, then Director Myers.
Yeah, so the motion on the table is to request a monitoring report. So it's not, Director Williams, not necessarily that policies don't get monitoring reports. We have the ability to ask our superintendent to monitor whatever we feel there is a need to monitor. So I would just, not alleviate, but just, respond with your concerns. I think the rationale behind the motion I made, this is what it does. First of all, it takes the focus off of being a wordsmithing activity on a policy that's, as Director Mika said, is already intact. Superintendent Kane even made the statement that the work of equity happens every day in our district as we constantly strive to meet the needs of every child. And this policy just captured that commitment. It didn't enact a new program. It didn't put in a new curriculum. It simply captured that foundational commitment that says we are making sure that all our learners' needs are being met. The current wording and directive in the resolution has created confusion in people thinking that equity is on hold right now, or that until we can get these recommended changes, that the policy is not intact. And I don't think that's the intent of any of us behind the dais. My understanding is that the intent is to monitor, measure, and evaluate the evidence that Superintendent Kane states is that equity is happening every day in our district as we constantly strive to meet the needs of every child. So I think we're getting what we want, and that is an understanding of how is that implemented, and do we need to make adjustments based on what is discovered as we're working through this process. So I would just say that it's not trying to circumvent the resolution, because the resolution is still intact. It still has those statements that some of us felt strongly needed to be said. It only just clarifies the task. And I think, quite honestly, we've left our Equity Advisory Council in limbo, because they're confused, in terms of what is their task, when we originally said, here's your task is to help monitor the implementation of this policy. So I think it just takes the confusion out, it gets specific, and it meets the needs of what all of you are wondering, and that is, how does this look when it impacts the child?
Okay, Director Myers, you were next.
One of the things that I gathered from the last conversation regarding all of the talk of the equity policy and Director Meek, I'm in understanding what was happening in nationwide and what was going on, which was, of course, one of the reasons that we came out. And I think at one time I did actually state that there were some proponents of this equity policy that I believe have CRT tenets to it. And so I was comfortable with Superintendent Kane and us reaching out now more to the community, having some, I don't know if they're forums or if we have one-on-one meetings with our community, but I would like to see a more diverse involvement within the community. And I know there were 1,000 stakeholders. I know it was hours and time of putting this ADB policy together. It was a little different game, I think, when we came on board. And so in clarifying this policy, I just think it's important that we go ahead and waive, and I would not agree with the amendment to the resolution. I just want to go forward and waive so that Superintendent Kane, and I thought we talked about monitoring reports in March. I thought, okay.
Superintendent Kane, if you'd like to address the monitoring report
Sure,
discussion.
Just a couple of quick comments. So the Equity Advisory Council selected their own area of focus back in January, Mr. Reynolds? Back in January for their next 18 months, and that area of focus was in hiring practices and HR, and they have been working through that area of focus. So I do want to be clear that the Superintendent Committee, the EAC, is not languishing. They are working on the area of focus that they themselves selected from a number of choices that they made back in January. So my question for your consideration around monitoring would be if there were metrics around this incorporated into an existing monitoring report rather than a separate monitoring report would be one question. And the second would be, would the metric be around the specific focus area that the EAC has chosen for themselves for whatever time period? So those are just two things for consideration. Mr. Reynolds, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, or Ms. Hyatt.
Yes, I just want to also recognize that the EAC has their own bylaws that outline, and this is in alignment with the policy ADB, what their roles and responsibilities are, which is where they determined the priority of looking at specifically recruitment and retention. Right now, that's their focus. So that is what they have been involved in. They did go through, as Superintendent Kane said, an exercise to determine that that was the priority they wanted to engage further in. So in consideration of additional monitoring of the equity policy, we'd want to be very thoughtful about how the Equity Advisory Council had prioritized their work and what data would be reflective of that moving forward.
One of the, you kind of just stole my commentary, which is I think we can include elements of this policy throughout our monitoring reports which support other goals. I'll just read sub-bullet C from our first goal, which is academic excellence. Every student has equitable opportunity to acquire knowledge and skills that will ensure performance at his or her highest individual potential. Relative to the charter that the EAC picked for themselves, outstanding educators, certainly hiring and equitable practices go into there. Everything to do with N number 3, which is our safe, positive culture and climate. There is ample opportunity, in my opinion, as one director, to weave elements of equity monitoring and assessment linked not necessarily to specifically policy ADB as a standalone policy, but to the themes in that policy that are reflected in our goals. So frankly, that would be an expectation of mine as one director, that we would see those individual supporting elements underneath the goals and included in monitoring reports. Director Meek, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think there are elements of equity that fall within all of the various monitoring reports, but it is our job also to monitor policy. And that's why we had the crosswalk with the executive limitations to the ends, because those weren't mapped out. And so you can kind of see how they all fit together. I think we've heard from members of the Equity Advisory Committee. They've written emails and have encouraged us to look at metrics. And I think that committee would be very excited to work with the superintendent and team to identify what the appropriate metrics would be. And I think they would very much appreciate having that opportunity.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I agree with everything that Director Meek just said. And one of the things I heard briefed at the last meeting was part of that engagement would be an attempt to develop an affirmative list of outcomes, which may be more suitable metric-wise. I know Director Meek talks about, well, there's wing flaps and then there's measurements. There could be some things that could be incorporated in monitoring reports they could bring. And then also what I'm interested in, which I think is a great source of fear for our community around equity, is the things that people don't want to have happen. And if those are enumerated, and those could also be included in monitoring reports, we would consider presence of any of these negatives to be a undesirable aspect of equity. I think that's exactly what we're looking for. So thank you, Director Meek, and I agree with that suggestion. Director Ray.
So I don't think the motion on the table usurps the focus that EAC has chosen. I think it fits very nicely into monitoring an educational equity policy. I mean, if we're looking at HR and if that's, our hiring practices, I think that definitely fits within that. So in terms of responding to Superintendent Kane, in terms of this monitoring report that would be requested of this policy, I would really rely on you to identify the metrics. I mean, I don't think, I think that you have a vision when you say equity happens every day already. You already have a vision of some of those metrics that you would use to demonstrate evidence of that happening. So again, I think the motion that's on the table simply clarifies the work that the superintendent is to do and with her staff. And I don't think it usurps the Educational Advisory Council's work, nor do I think that it takes away from the spirit of the resolution in terms of getting clarity of what is good implementation and what is implementation that maybe we want to correct.
Director Meek.
Yeah, all that I would add is I think this proposed amendment just gives more teeth to the resolution that exists. You are asking the superintendent to come back to you and tell you what is happening today in our classrooms. What is the state of the district in this area? By keeping it the way it is, you're just kicking the can down the road and not taking action. And there is an existing policy in place that deserves to be monitored today so that we can actually understand what is happening.
Thank you, Director Meek. Any other directors? Okay, we have a motion on the table as stated by Director Ray. I won't read the specifics, but basically to amend the first statement under the current resolution to include a monitoring report as directed from the Board of Education to the superintendent, previously stated by Ray, seconded by Meek. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the roll. Director Hansen.
I just want to highlight in my vote that resolutions are the least effective method of governing. There's a reason it's been on our agenda. I think this might be the 5th plus time that we've talked about it. We as a board don't have clarity. Our staff, I'm not sure, have clarity. Our community certainly doesn't have clarity. The resolution process is just clunky. It doesn't work. Director Ray's amendment, I think, brings us closer to what the true process should have looked like. Is there's a policy. All of the concerns that you have, we could have just requested a monitoring report and had those specific things addressed. We could have drafted that monitoring report together. We are where we are. I think that Director Ray's motion brings us closer to a cleaner, more simplified process, and so I will vote to support that. Aye.
Okay, aye from Director Hansen. Director Meek.
Aye.
Director Myers.
I really feel like the resolution that we already have, the Board of Education directs the superintendent to recommend potential changes to board policy ADB. I'm going to stand in support of that and vote no.
No for Myers. I am also going to vote no because I believe without having to further direct and modify the resolution, what I am expecting is what I stated previously. I'm expecting aspects to be incorporated in monitoring reports throughout that are tied to our other goals. So I will be voting no. Director Ray.
Aye.
Director Ray, aye. Williams.
I actually don't think our current resolution, I don't think this is kicking the can down the road. I believe that Superintendent Kane said that she would come back in March. And so I am also a no.
Director Weiniger.
No.
Motion is defeated by a vote of 4-3. And I will entertain any other motions around the original recommendation.
Motion to approve the waiver of deadline for superintendent to recommend potential changes to board policy ADB.
Second.
We have a motion to confirm the waiver of the deadline to the superintendent to recommend potential changes to policy ADB made by Weiniger and second by Myers. Discussion. If there's no discussion, I'll take the roll. Director Hansen.
Right or wrong, we are where we are, and if Superintendent Kane needs more time, I can agree to that. Aye.
Director Meek.
No.
Director Myers.
Aye.
Director Peterson, aye. Director Ray.
No.
Director Williams.
Aye.
Director Weiniger.
Aye.
Motion is passed by a vote of 5-2. Before we move into policy resolution